everyone, I'm Dennis. Thanks for joining me in the art studio, also known as my basement. It may not look like much, but it's actually the perfect place to kick off my video series on the fundamentals of paper marbling. Marbling is a centuries-old art form that has a long association with bookbinding. In the West, it was widely used to embellish the covers, end papers, and even the page edges of books. Once a closely guarded trade secret, the process of floating paint on a liquid and then printing it onto paper is no longer a mystery, though it does require some unusual and perhaps unfamiliar materials. For over 6 years now, I've been learning and exploring this unique medium, and now in this video series I'll share with you what I've learned, starting with the materials and tools required to achieve the subtle alchemy that is paper marbling. Part 1. Materials. Some of the materials used for marbling, like paper and paint, are very familiar. Others, like mordants and surfactants, sound like they belong more in a science lab than an art studio. But in order to successfully marble, it's important to not only understand what these specialized materials are, but what role they play in the process, as well as how they're prepared. But as this is a fluid art, let's start with the most universal ingredient: water. This may seem pretty basic, but since marbling can be tricky at the best of times, reducing unknown variables is a big part of success. Tap water can contain all sorts of minerals and compounds, which could interfere with the marbling process. To eliminate that risk, I only use distilled water for mixing with other media. Tap water is reserved just for rinsing or cleaning up. If I talk about mixing water with anything else, you can be sure it's been distilled, even if I don't say so. The size. If there's one material that defines paper marbling, it would have to be the fluid bath upon which the designs are created. More correctly referred to as size, it's just water to which a thickening agent has been added. In modern Western marbling, the two most common thickeners are methylcellulose and carrageenan. Methylcell makes for a passable marbling size, which is relatively inexpensive and will remain usable at room temperature for weeks. It has some drawbacks, which I'll discuss later, but if you want to just dip your toe into marbling, well, not literally, methylcellulose could be a good choice. Derived from a type of seaweed, carrageenan is widely available as a processed powder, though in coastal regions it may be available in its whole state. 3 varieties are commonly used in the food industry for their thickening properties, though only lambda carrageenan is suitable for marbling. Like methylcellulose, carrageenan powder is prepared with water to create a marbling size. As it is essentially a food product, carrageenan must be used while fresh, and will last for 2 to 3 days before going off and becoming unusable, though refrigeration can extend that for up to a week. Despite this short working life, carrageenan has long been considered the ideal medium for paper marbling, and has been my preference for years. I now purchase mine in bulk, and I'm happy to say that I have enough to offer it in my Etsy shop, so check out the link in the description if you'd like to purchase some. Paint. Obviously we'll need some sort of pigment in order to create our patterns. While some similar art forms use ink or oil pigments, Western paper marbling uses water-based paints. Most marblers either use gouache paint or acrylic, and both can produce excellent results. I personally use acrylics, but I'm consistently impressed by the work of other marblers who use gouache. The most important consideration when choosing a paint for marbling is the amount of pigment it contains. Marbling paints need to be diluted in order to float and spread on the size, so a lot of pigment is needed in order to produce vivid colors. Inexpensive paints for kids or crafts typically have a minimal amount of pigment, while more expensive professional artist paints will have more. Luckily, marbling uses relatively little paint, so it pays to get the good stuff. Surfactant. The magic of marbling is how the paints spread and flow on the surface of the size. In order for that to happen, most paints require an additive that reduces surface tension to create that spreading effect. Such an additive is called a surfactant, and there are several that can be used for marbling. The most traditional marbling surfactant is oxgall, which is exactly what it sounds like. And oxgall has been used for centuries for paper marbling. Luckily, there are a couple of easier options. Dish soap. Drop a bit of dish soap onto a sink full of greasy water and you'll see its use as a surfactant immediately. For marbling, it should be diluted at least 1 to 1 with water, and potentially much more depending on the brand and the desired strength. This solution can then be kept in its own container and added to the paints as needed. Kodak PhotoFlow 200. PhotoFlow is an excellent marbling surfactant. It's available online or from specialty camera stores, and one container is basically a lifetime supply for the casual marbler. It's my preferred surfactant, which I put into a dropper to easily adjust my paints. Paper. The single greatest question facing the novice marbler is what paper to use. Unfortunately, there's no single paper that's perfect for all marbling all the time. I'll give some guidelines as to what to look for, as well as share what I use, but my best advice is to test and test and test some more. Keep notes on what papers work and which don't, until you find one that you're happy with. A good marbling paper should be relatively strong when wet. Those with a higher cotton content can be good in this regard, but that alone shouldn't be the deciding factor. It's best to avoid coated papers, as those won't take the paint very well. A relatively absorbent surface is better. Some light texture is okay, but avoid those with a lot of character. Very heavy or stiff papers are harder to work with, so those from 80 to 120 GSM that drape well tend to be easier to handle. Watercolor paper is both too rigid and too expensive for the novice marbler. And finally, some papers have hard to identify characteristics like buffering agents or internal sizing that don't play well with marbling. Often these will only make themselves known once they're tried out, so as I said before, test, and test some more. All that being said, I've had my best results with 100 GSM Canson Ingress Vidalon, 120 GSM Fabriano Academia drawing paper, and 125 GSM Canaletto Vellino. These have all given me good, repeatable prints, though your individual results may vary. Mordant. Regardless of which paper you use, it will need to be prepared before it can be successfully marbled. Part of the magic of marbling is that when done properly, the paint is permanently fixed to the paper the instant it's laid on the sides. This is achieved through a chemical reaction that only happens if the paper is prepared with a mordant, and for paper marbling, that substance is alum. Alum generally refers to potassium aluminum sulfate, which is the same stuff used for pickling. It's available as a refined white powder, which can be dissolved in water. A similar product, aluminum sulfate, sometimes called papermaker's alum, can often be found in garden stores as a soil acidifier. It's slightly more granular than pickling alum and can have impurities, such as small stones, but in my experience it yields identical results as a mordant. For simplicity, I'll use the term alum to mean either one of these mordants, as their usage for marbling is exactly the same. Part 2. Tools. Now that you're familiar with the ingredients, let's take a look at the gear you'll need to put them all together. The first thing you'll need is a workspace. Marbling is a messy business, so if you're working in a kitchen or other finished space, be sure to lay down a drop cloth or newspapers around your work area. A better option is to find a space like an unfinished basement, garden shed, or outdoor space where you can fling paint to your heart's content. Whatever your workspace, it should be cool and dry, around 20 degrees Celsius and 50 to 60% humidity. More or less than that, and you may find that your size and paints will not behave properly. You'll need a stable and level work surface to work on that's large enough to accommodate your tray, as well as the other materials. Access to running water, such as a utility sink, is key, as is having a ready supply of cleanup supplies like paper towels, sponges, and rags. Strips of newsprint are also a must for cleaning the sides between prints. As far as fashion goes, a smock paired with some old clothes, cheap shoes, and a head covering is all the rage among marblers. Rubber gloves can be handy to keep your fingers clean, and also for protection when working with the alum, as it can dry out your skin. Next, you'll need some sort of tray for the size. You can buy purpose-built marbling trays, though most beginners will make do with something like a baking sheet, aluminum pan, plastic tote, or even a litter box, new and unused, obviously. Many professional marblers use custom-built trays, especially when working at a larger scale. Whatever you use, it should obviously be waterproof, a few inches longer and wider than the paper you'll be using, and with fairly low sides. To go with the tray, I like to use a draining board, both to allow the excess size to drip back into the tank and to support the paper for rinsing. What it's made of isn't critical, so either plastic or plywood are fine. Some marblers use a long dowel instead of a board to pick up and drain their papers, and that works as well. Mixing up the size will require a combination of tools. A small digital scale is invaluable for accurately portioning the powdered size, and a graduated container large enough to measure and mix the water is handy too. Alternatively, a set of measuring spoons and a measuring cup can do the trick. Both carrageenan and methylcell are relatively hard to mix, so something like a blender, hand mixer, or a paint mixing attachment in a drill is a necessity. Most paints can't be used for marbling right out of the tube. They need to be thinned with water, as well as adjusted with surfactant, or mixed with other colors to create a custom palette. I like to use small glass jars with lids for both mixing and storing my prepared paints, though plastic cups or squeeze bottles are some other options. Some basic mixing tools like palette knives or popsicle sticks are handy, and my little scale is a must for accurately repeating my color mixes. Getting the paint onto the size is done with a number of tools that fall into two general groups, throwing or dropping. The most traditional and messy method is throwing, which involves using a brush to flick droplets of paint onto the size. Horsehair brushes are the norm for Turkish marbling, called Ebru, though fan brushes or whisks made of natural or synthetic straw are more common in the West. Throwing paint recreates the most organic looking patterns, and you want to experiment with a variety of shapes and sizes to see what works for you. A more controlled way to apply the paint is to apply individual droplets, either using fine-tipped squeeze bottles, eyedroppers, or a simple stylus. This method is well suited to patterns made with combs or rakes, or when a degree of repeatability is desired. I've tried several types of droppers over the years, and my favorites are these inexpensive 3 milliliter pipettes. They can be purchased by the hundred for just a few dollars, and if cleaned well, they can be reused many times. In my opinion, the most magical aspect of marbling is how the floating paints can be manipulated on the size without mixing with it or each other. In order to do that, a variety of tools are used. The simplest of these is a stylus, which can just be a toothpick, skewer, or chopstick. Styluses of different diameters will affect the pattern differently. A pin has almost no drag in the size and will slice up the pattern like a knife, whereas something of pencil thickness creates a significant wake and will draw the paint out into long, fine ribbons. Combs and rakes are simply multiple styluses which have been put on a handle. Many traditional patterns can only be made with these tools. Most marblers make their own combs and rakes to fit their specific tray, and even just a single simple rake can be used to create a wide variety of designs. More complex patterns might require combinations of standard rakes or specific tools with more complicated tooth configurations. With several combs and rakes in the toolkit, the number of patterns possible is limited only by the marbler's imagination. Drying and pressing. Once you've printed and rinsed your papers, you'll need a place to let them drip dry. Simply draping the papers over a line or dowel will suffice, though the resulting bend in the dried sheet will need extra care when flattening. Hanging the sheets vertically with clothespins or something similar is preferable, though even with this method the prints will be wrinkled when dry and will require flattening. Luckily, all that's required for this is a smooth surface, a board to cover your papers, some heavy objects, and time. In most cases, your work will emerge relatively flat by the next morning. So that's the broad strokes overview of the tools and materials of marbling. I know it was a lot of information in a short time, so I'm going to leave it here for today. I'm sure I missed a few things, so if you have any questions, then feel free to leave them for me down in the comments. I'll do my best to respond to them all individually, and if necessary, I'll cover the most frequent questions in a subsequent video. That way we can all be on the same page when I come back with part 2, which will be all about taking what we learned today and putting it into practice to do some actual marbling. If you're eager for more information in the meantime, then you should definitely check out my Patreon. That's where I share updates and unique content between YouTube videos, so it's a great way to get more 4Keys goodness. And if you're gearing up to do some marbling with me next time, then do head over to my Etsy shop to get some carrageenan. I've used this supplier for years for my own, so I'm excited to be able to offer it directly. You can order as little as a quarter of a pound, which is enough for at least half a dozen small batches and should be more than enough to get you started. I'll put a link to it down in the video description. Okay, that's enough shameless self-promotion for one video. Thank you so much for watching until the end here. I do hope you found it to be both interesting and informative. Now, I've got lots of prep to do for part 2, so until then, I'm Dennis, and I'll see you next time.